Welcome back to Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Judy Nathans.
And I'm Robert Winters.
Yeah, here we are still.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and it's still March 2nd,
March 2nd.
2021. Yes.
Yes.
We were in the last half hour, we were talking about an ordinance committee meeting having to do with campaign finance. So
Right.
let's move on from that. There were two other meetings, one in the past and one coming up in 2 days.
Right.
I don't think there's much to be said about the one. It was a kind of a joint meeting of the neighborhood and land long-term planning, et cetera, committee.
Whatever. Yeah.
And the housing committee.
Yeah.
Specifically, there was no proposal before anybody technically, but it was about just a general discussion about the possibility
zoning, right? Yeah.
of relaxing or eliminating single-family zoning. And this too has become very politicized.
Yeah.
And I have sort of mixed feelings about it. I actually spoke at that meeting.
You did, plus a lot of people from ABC. So that it was almost like the same people that spoke on the missing middle thing spoke.
Well, one thing I think I need to say really is that in some respects, Cambridge is basically acting like a sandbox for national movements and national organizations these days. So for example, the YIMBY movement, which is you see a lot of it on the West Coast, and the ABC group is effectively a chapter of the YIMBY movement locally. There are certain things they're pushing, like this missing middle petition is one of them. One is the elimination of single-family zoning.
Right.
And there are a few other things, no doubt.
But there were a couple people though. Henry Wurtis, who represent Our Revolution, who actually quoted you.
Yes,
remember that?
Did.
So there were
a wise man.
It wasn't all uniform because you had just published that whole list, and Heather Hoffman about what would happen in certain neighborhoods. So it wasn't all like the same. Yeah.
Well, I think, see, this is the reality. What happens when you have basically a national presence starts showing up in our little sandbox here, kicking things around, applying a standard that may be valid in Minneapolis or Seattle or whatever, but it's not a particularly great match for Cambridge.
Right, because Minneapolis had mostly single family zoning.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We don't. We have a very dense, we're right on the top 5 or 10, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the very, very good things about that meeting was that Jeff Roberts from the Community Development Department gave kind of a factual history of Cambridge zoning.
Oh, that's right, he did, didn't he?
As opposed to the kind of fictional history that others are pushing around here.
Right.
Don't you know it was all done for evil purposes and whatever. Whereas the real, I think a much closer version to reality is that Cambridge zoning, though it has changed over the years, is initially was basically established to kind of effectively codify what is. All right, so there were certain patterns in existence in terms of who, people moving here, there, whatever, or industry being there, high density residential, lower density residential, whatever. And they basically said, all right, well, let's lay it out this way. Originally, there wasn't single family versus multifamily, et cetera. That actually came a little bit later. But once again, it was primarily just a kind of a statement of what is, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to a prohibition, right? This is very different than many other communities in this country, or even in Massachusetts, where
we have everything here. We have
basically
high rise. We have low rise. We have 2 families. We have 3 deckers. We have singles. We have everything.
Exactly. And what Cambridge is in a sense, it's almost like a legacy of what was. The thing is that my house, it's true, couldn't have been built under current zoning.
Oh, it's like right to the line there.
right to the
throw
line.
A lasso and get somebody across.
Right, and greater density than it would currently be allowed.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll flat out say that I'm relatively comfortable with most aspects of the pattern of development in the city. Even the Envision Cambridge people, for the most part, were promoting growth in the squares, transit-oriented development, growth in the squares along major transit corridors. But that seems to all have been forgotten with some of the kind of the ABC kind of perspective, which basically just says grow it anywhere, and everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, so anyway, it was an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out with Henry Wurtis and a few others, some of the kind of the hard left people have objections because if you're just going to allow more and more development,
it's going to be for moderate income or wealthier people. Yeah.
But yeah. So, you know, so what will then happen? You're going to say, okay, well, you can only, we want everybody to build densely, but if you do so, you can only do it for low income housing or something like that. Is that
that's really not what the missing middle says?
That's not what the missing middle petition really says. Yeah. I mean, to me, everybody ought to take 3 giant steps backwards and say, hold on. Can we just have a nice actual discussion about what the Envision people, for example? I mean, I'm not a big fan, as you know, of the product of Envision, but there were some appropriate discussions and appropriate ideas laid out there, which have nothing to do with what people are just throwing into the public sphere these days.
All right, so I'm going to just throw something out because it's come up again in this meeting. If you are in a single family zone, whatever, like up in West Cambridge, and you wanted to convert your single family into an apartment for your mother-in-law or something, so you would just seek a special permit, a variance?
No, you can do it. I think they actually did.
So why? Because one of the public, I won't mention, was complaining that seemed to say that they couldn't do that. They were prevented from doing that. And I didn't think
there may be other limitations.
Really?
You know, for example, and I think they need to actually look at what the law says, and you can people can thank Mr. Barrett a little bit for.
Well, I was going to say the accessory dwelling, I thought allowed that.
Not only for that, but also the fact is under state law, single and 2 family homes actually have, if they are currently non-conforming because they were built long ago, you can actually, you have some flexibility. And I think the city solicitor came back with an opinion to the city council, sort of making that point relatively recently. So
it just seems to me that if someone has some money and they can convert their single family into a 2 family, I don't think there's going to be a lot of objections to that. I mean, you have to alert abutters, but it just seems to me it's doable.
I think in many respects you can do it now, but the thing is that I think you wouldn't find too many objections.
Yeah.
And if that was all the people were proposing, it'd be one thing. But
I know that. I'm just commenting on a particular.
The so-called missing middle proposal that's only kind of part of a sales pitch part of it.
Yeah. I understand.
The real substantial part of it really has nothing to do with single versus 2 family versus 3 family. It really has to do with dramatically increasing the permissible
density,
residential development density by sometimes by a factor of 2.5.
Right.
You know, so that's really what the issue is. And, you know, people can read all the rosy liner notes in the album cover, but I'm sorry, but the real substance is all about significant increase in density. That's really what it is. And if that's good, fine. If it's bad, fine. You know, but people have to at least understand what is actually being proposed. Anyway, that meeting really wasn't about missing middle. It was just about the propriety. But I think people were using it as kind of a warm-up session to say. Now, there's another meeting coming up 2 days from
same group, but different topic, right?
Specifically, Neighborhood Long-Term Planning Committee.
Yeah.
And this is what grew out of this sort of little kerfuffle that happened some months ago with East Cambridge, the proposal for an East Cambridge Neighborhood Conservation District, right?
Right, and then
some people started sort of, kind of torpedoing the meeting and whatever, and then there were council orders that sort of said, well, you know, evil people, no, you're the evil person, no, you're the evil person,
and I don't have a voice. You limit who you can be on these all that stuff.
And I don't think anybody's ever really come to terms with where that's going or whatever, and so much misrepresentation to begin with anyway.
Right.
But the thing is, one thing that came out is like, well, to what degree should the city be, quote, supporting neighborhood groups? And to what degree should the city be prescribing rules for neighborhood groups,
or even giving them money?
Well, that's supporting, and I mean, I wrote something, actually put it up on the site we have here for today. I won't necessarily read it all here, but basically the point I would make about this is that, and first off, let's be clear, there's neighborhood groups, right? Like East Cambridge Planning Team, Mid Cambridge Neighborhood Association, et cetera,
Neighborhood Association,
and they're not all from a common template. Some of
No,
them are service
they
oriented.
were,
Some of them,
right. They grew
yeah,
out of different needs too, some
yeah.
of them.
So that you can't really kind of fit them all into a comfortable shirt. I mean,
Yeah.
they vary. That's just the reality of it all. And then there's advocacy groups like ABC, for example. They're not a neighborhood group by any
No,
stretch of the imagination,
they're
or
a pack now though, aren't they?
and they are political action committee. There's also, Cambridge Citizens Coalition, something that could call
Oh
itself the
yeah.
Association of Cambridge Neighborhoods, may be an association of Cambridge neighborhoods, but it's not a neighborhood association.
Oh right.
It,
ASN. Yeah.
it sort of tries to be an umbrella group, but the thing is that ultimately that means it's an advocacy group.
Hmm.
So, and then there are political groups in this that operate in the city, and
Cambridge Residents Alliance.
right, or
Or
ABC, which is backs
well,
candidates. So there
right.
is a
Yeah.
controversy that's been floating around some of the listservs, which I completely agree with, which is, or how do you agree with the controversy? But right, yeah, I believe fighting, we shall fight.
You recognize the
I
controversy.
recognize the controversy, which is, so the chair of that committee is Patty Nolan. Apparently, unless things change,
Mhm.
invited to the meeting was the ABC group. Now, ABC group is essentially a local political
Well,
party.
wait, they were invited to the, how do you know they're invited to the group? It says that on the agenda?
That's what I was told. I haven't read the
Oh,
agenda, but that's what I was
I
told.
don't know if
And I
they,
don't know if it's true,
yeah,
but the idea is, if you want to have a discussion about the appropriateness of supporting neighborhood groups,
it should be a neighborhood group kind of
yes,
thing.
yeah. And arguably, and people can give me grief about this as much as you like, but the ABC group has basically some of its prominent members basically operating as representatives within a few
Mm.
neighborhood groups,
Yeah,
specifically to carry the water of
yeah,
ABC.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, in other words, if somebody in a neighborhood group, you know, raises an issue, they say, well, they bring sort of the
Yeah.
ABC perspective to it. So I think there is something structurally wrong about organizing a meeting about supporting neighborhood groups where
Well, doesn't
one
community
part,
development, I remember I looked at this a while ago, they have a listing of neighborhood groups.
and I think they need to revise that,
Okay.
and they
It's
need to
mostly,
clarify it.
all
Yeah,
right.
I mean,
But I don't think yeah,
on my
ABC is not
website,
on
I
there.
have a links page, and I
Yeah.
separate out, and I have
Oh,
always
do
done
you?
this.
Okay.
I have neighborhood groups, advocacy groups,
Okay.
political groups,
Good for you. All right.
and if you don't
Well,
do
some of them
that,
get mixed up too. I mean,
well, and then that in itself is a problem. I mean, if you want to be essentially a political party, don't
not a party,
present,
but are you saying a neighborhood group can't, well, usually it's hard to get a uniform a voice or one to say we believe in
you
this.
know,
Then it becomes political, but
neighborhood associations, for the
yeah.
most part, don't endorse candidates. In fact, depending on how they were formed, like for example, if they were a 501c3, they can't endorse candidates.
They can have forums. They do
They
have
can host
forums. Right,
forums, and
right,
that's what they do,
right, which is
and
good.
that's great. Yeah, but the thing is that they're not really in the business of
That makes
endorsing
sense.
candidates.
And that's how
So
it should be, I think. Yeah,
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. So I think there's some rethinking has to happen
Yeah.
on this. Now, the other thing I'd say about this is that I think there is a fundamental problem with city
Mm-hmm.
funding, providing any direct financial support to groups,
Mm-hmm.
because of the,
Oh, yeah.
you sort of, you need to kind of maintain your objectivity and your freedom,
Right, right,
to
right.
be a jerk if you want to be a jerk too,
Without, yeah,
So what happens if you basically are oppositional? And I'm not saying
yeah,
neighborhood groups should be oppositional, but
right,
if it is your choice, if your members feel this is what they
yeah,
want to do,
right,
and they're getting money and
yeah,
support from the city,
yeah,
does that kind of compromise their ability to take a
yeah,
position?
right,
I think it might. So I think it's
yeah,
something people should think long and hard about.
yep.
And also, another thing that was implicit in this, whatever the city council order that's leading to this meeting coming up here, is this question about setting rules and guidelines for neighborhood associations.
Oh, they should stay out of that.
I think every single neighborhood association should have rules,
Right,
guidelines,
that they come up with
outreach, etc.
themselves. They have to come up with that
That's
themselves.
right. It's still an
Right,
association of individuals
right,
organized in a particular way, and there's
right.
something really kind of unsavory
Mm-hmm.
about this notion that fundamentally incumbent elected officials would somehow be laying out the framework with which these groups can operate.
They could only do that if they took over and say, we're going to fund you. I mean, which I don't want to see that happen, but that's the only reason they could do that, is because they have some stake in it. But that's all ridiculous.
Now, if there is a desire amongst elected officials to, quote, support neighborhoods, whatever that means, they have multiple means of doing so already. For example, there are some of the settlement houses in places like East End House and whatever, which effectively operate as neighborhood centers that receive city funds, and they support programs and other things. So
they could meet there. They could use city buildings.
They can use the buildings, but also just the activities. In-kind
donations, right?
Yes.
The activity, yeah.
And I think it was actually an idea that was first pushed or primarily pushed by then councilor or then mayor Frank Duhay, which was the promotion of the community schools program.
Oh, okay.
Now, I mean, at least my understanding has been that the city of Cambridge has these assets. They're called school buildings.
Right.
And the school buildings are primarily used in the daytime. But the thing is, the building exists.
It should be multi-service centers, right?
Right. You have a gymnasium, you have auditoriums, you have rooms
Pools,
you can meet in.
Okay. I mean, the new King Open, or the upper, is a magnificent building. It's got everything in it. Yeah.
So to some degree, I think everybody at the time felt that, well, we should find a way to do that. So they created these neighborhood councils, neighborhood school councils. Even across the street from me, the Longfellow schools there had and I presumably, even though it doesn't have a regular school, well, it doesn't have the same elementary school program that it had, but there was the Longfellow Neighborhood Council.
Do you think those still exist, all these neighborhood councils?
I think they exist, and they're coordinated through the Department of Human Services programs.
Well, there's school liaisons too, which I think help.
But those are very specific to the schools. But they could
all right, you're right.
Act as a liaison all around.
Yeah, you're right.
So I do think that it is a good thing for the city to consider and reevaluate the way they support neighborhoods through the neighborhood schools program without
direct financial.
Right. Now, sometimes these neighborhood schools programs would sort of like get overly specific, because there would be a staff person who was assigned, and they just happen to do certain things, and then the program became defined by that. Like, for example, there was some music programs, so you could learn calligraphy from Longfellow Neighborhood Council from Penny Penny Cleese was running the things there. So, but I think that there is a potential there to rediscover the good aspects of the neighborhood schools program, and the city council in the city, if they want to support neighborhoods, there's a vehicle through which they can do it.
Right. Yeah.
The neighborhood associations are just associations of people, and if they can work cooperatively, as they often do with the neighborhood councils, great. But the thing is, that's the vehicle through which I think the city should basically exercise its.
Good. Well, hopefully people will read that, or you'll submit that in some form as a public comment, or you'll make public comment on that.
Yeah, maybe I should do that more often. I just gripe sometimes.
No, but I think those are good ideas, and I think people need to hear them. So we have about less than 10 minutes left. We should talk about last night's council meeting a little bit.
So there were it wasn't a big agenda, but there were a few big items on it.
Well, always the front of stage is COVID-19 reports.
Definitely, the COVID-19 reports, and it is definitely worth noting. It is that the numbers are definitely moving in a good direction. I think I will do a little quick share screen here.
Okay.
And just to say here that there was a new fatality from yesterday to today.
Oh, really?
Yes,
it's 121 now.
in the general community. So 76 long-term care facilities, and now
which
45.
Is about stayed the same. So it's actually been increasing in the general community. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, that's consistent with the story that's happening nationally. Is that they've
largely. True. There's less now because. Yeah, right.
Yeah, a lot of the fatalities of long-term care facilities was a phenomenon that was largely at the upfront part of this.
Exactly, and now most of those people are vaccinated, or they're
Yeah, so then that's actually becoming less of the issue, but it's still out there.
You're right.
And if you still look at the trend, it's kind of hard to see here. It's still climbing at a steady rate in
Yeah,
terms of,
yeah.
but it is getting
Interesting.
better with each day.
Wow.
Or well, I shouldn't say that's sort of a contradiction, but we're basically below.
But that chart is only from the beginning of this year, right? Yeah.
Right. This is really
Yeah.
just from January.
So it
So
really has,
just to kind of
wow,
see
it's
that
really
in the
gone up.
last month and a
Yeah.
half,
Ooh, ooh, ooh,
the thing
ooh.
is that it is starting to head toward leveling, but it is, it was rapidly increasing, and it's still increasing, but less so.
But it seems like from what I gather is that, yes, there's more, but there's less hospitalizations. Is that
And
true?
that is probably the most important thing. In fact,
Right,
actually, from
right,
yesterday to today,
right.
there was a decrease of 183 current
Right.
cases.
So there's still people are getting it, but maybe it's not as
Right.
infectious or.
Yeah. The worst of, we seem to
Oh,
be
here we
past the
go. This is
worst of
the
it
whole
all.
thing. This is the
But
whole
in terms
year.
of the
Yeah.
7-day average, you'll notice here that the rapid decline in the 7-day average of infection is no longer declining in the way that it was. We would love it if it just went down to zero, but it seems to be kind of hovering here in the
Interesting.
15
Yeah.
to 20 range, which is very
Mhm.
much still triple what it was in the summertime. So my personal
Yeah.
intuitive feel about this is that
Cold winter
this,
months. It's the winter
right,
being inside.
and
Yep.
and as vaccinations increase
Right.
and the
Yeah.
weather gets warmer, this will
Yes.
start to decline. And I
Yep.
hope it'll decline a lot, but
Yes.
we don't know. We don't really know.
Yeah. There's no such thing as no risk.
Right.
You
And
walk out your door, there's a risk.
yeah, so now as of yesterday, the
Yeah.
city, well, the state, but the city as well,
Yeah.
did change, so there was more of a reopening.
Yeah.
Restaurants don't have a numerical limit, but you still have to
Right.
maintain spacing.
You have to wear
So
masks.
still gotta wear
Texas,
masks
just
when you go
today,
in.
the governor said, okay, it's all over. No
That's right.
masks,
It's
no
like, oh,
nothing.
well, yeah.
And meanwhile, they're dealing with the
Yeah,
worst weather, pipes, and that state, really. Okay.
I
So
don't know. Maybe
we're doing okay.
I think we're doing okay. There was a
Yeah.
bit of a kind of
Kerfuffle?
a
No.
kerfuffle at the council meeting where the city,
Yeah.
the Claude Jacobs is saying one thing,
Mhm.
Louis Di Pasquale is saying another thing, and Councilor Zondervan wanted to make it out as if you got to shut everything down now.
Yeah.
Don't you
Yeah.
know? Follow the science.
People are dying,
And virtually nobody else in the room
and
was
we're
in
opening all
agreement
the
with him.
stuff. And I will still say is our, who's going to these restaurants and gyms? It's people that are probably, have jobs at home. They're younger. I don't think they're more vulnerable communities that are participating in these events.
I mean,
But,
I'm not going to say absolutely everything the city has said and done is perfect, but the thing is that they are, I think, and I'll say the same thing with the schools too. They are trying to thread this path very carefully of a balance between, stasis is not an option.
No, it's been a year.
Pulling a Texas is not an option.
No,
and
we're trying to
finding that right balance. So
we've done more testing than any city, I think, in the state, let alone gosh knows where.
Yeah.
And we're trying. Do you know? I just read that. I thought they were wrong. There's the CVS supposedly in Central Square is giving shots.
Yes, I saw the signs on it. Yeah.
I know, but to me, it's such a small place. I don't even like going in there to shop, let alone. I don't know how they're doing it.
Right. But by the way, I think President Biden today basically came right out and said that with this really amazing reemergence of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, together with this deal they're making with Merck Pharmaceuticals, and basically their competition to do production, that they're now actually saying, we think we might actually have enough vaccine for everybody far sooner than everybody had ever said prior.
It's so the supply is an issue, but it's also getting appointments is an issue, and they've got to straighten that out. It's gotten better, but
the stumbling forward that we always do, we seem to be finding our way now at long last, and we're not great yet, and honestly, you went to Fenway, you got your first shot, you're getting your second.
You're going to announce it. Okay, well, thanks to my daughter who stayed online she was doing other stuff for like almost 6 hours 2 weeks ago Thursday. She got it for me, and that's why I'm not going to be here next week. Patrick
2 weeks
for me. 2 weeks, sorry, because I'm getting my second shot. But yeah, Thursday mornings, you should, if you want to get it done at Fenway, get that nice button that says I got vaccinated at Fenway.
It's a good incentive. Really?
It is. Thursday mornings is when they release those appointments.
Yeah.
Now, things
But
might change when they start the baseball. They still are going to do it there, but April 1st is the first home game.
I'm so thrilled to have it coming.
Yeah.
I watched the spring training game the
Okay.
other day on TV.
Wow.
Yesterday, I had it running.
You're
Even,
kidding.
sometimes just having it playing
Didn't
in the
they
background
lose?
makes me
I think
feel.
they lost, no?
They did, yeah. And it was
Yeah.
only 7 innings they're playing. It's like,
Oh, okay.
I'm
The
sorry,
Twins,
baseball
yeah,
games should
yeah.
be 9 innings. And
Okay.
that rule about putting a person on the second base in the extra innings, I despise that rule.
And
But
they are going
that's
to
me.
allow fans, I think, up to
Some
10,000
limited amount of
maybe, or
fans.
some,
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, so
All
we're
right. So
kind of low on time. I'm going to say
all
just
right.
a couple of quick shots, okay,
Yeah,
if I
we'll have
may.
to. Yeah, we didn't go.
All right. So there's a controversy about there was a zoning for an Alewife, Northwest Alewife petition.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting. I like to understand what all the pros and cons are.
Yeah.
It's one of the more complicated discussions
It's interesting. The
politically.
people that said no on it were not usually people that agree with each other.
Yeah, this one's a little bit different.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, it just is sort of more of a kind of a historical flash, is that there was an order. Nobody objected to it. It had to do with looking at a property at 25 Lowell Street for a possible housing
I went
site.
by there the other day to see what there was.
Yeah, and as soon as I saw that, I said to myself, "Wow, there's 30 years," because back then, when Councilor Ed Sear was on the city council, they had a proposal for what they called the land bank, and they identified it was actually about a dozen sites around the city for possible use in that way. And then, it got very much political, whatever. Some of the sites were really kind of terrible sites. That was one of the sites.
Really?
So, yeah. So, 30 years later, it's come back here, going to push it here. But, whether that's appropriate or not, I can't say. That site that they want took for housing is actually contiguous with a piece of a park. They could also choose to just extend the playground area too. And so who knows where it goes.
All right.
Anyway, I guess just about, let's do another half hour. Okay.
All right.
See you in a couple of weeks.
All right. Bye.